Dun, 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 dun. Hello all, and welcome back to Sigil Spotlight, episode 5. I am Mr. Harlan Guthrie, and I am joined once again by...
Aaron Abolt.
There you go. I always feel weird about introducing you, and I say it every time. You know your name. Everyone knows your name. Welcome. We are so excited for today. We have an amazing guest on. Today we have Mr. John Wick on the show, and I always feel weird about that because I want to be like, oh, do we want to like save it as a little bit of a, oh, who's it going to be? Pop up. It could be anybody. It could be like somebody, you know, in a fursuit who takes off that helmet, and it's surprise Stephen Colbert. But we do have someone just as equally as exciting today, and we're going to bring them on in just a minute. But before we do that, how are you doing, Ellen?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Yeah. Good. You're moving very soon, I know.
Yeah, next time we stream, I will be in a new office.
A new background?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. Better background, obviously. You're moving up in the world.
Yeah, still trying to decide if you guys are going to face the wall behind me or the windows. We'll have to see.
Get in your votes now.
Yeah.
What you want to see, and Ellen will decide based on that.
Yes, the new backyard or the new wall.
That's exciting. Moving's always exciting. It's nerve-wracking, it's stressful, but it's exciting, especially when it's all done. And you know what? There is something nice about kind of like casually unboxing. I don't know if you're one of those like get them out of here ASAP, rip open every box and get the stuff up on the walls, but
it depends. Like the functional stuff that we use, yes. The actual like decor and like decorating stuff, not so much, because it's like I don't know what the space is like. I don't know what the light is like. I don't know what we're using this room as.
Who knows?
It takes time.
Pro tip though, the minute you start hanging pictures on the wall, that's when the new house starts feeling like a home to me. From the number of times I've moved, the minute I start getting stuff up on the walls, pictures and whatnot, I'm like, okay, cool. It's feeling so much more homey.
Yeah, it loses. There's like that echoing thing that houses do before you get stuff on the wall.
The echoing thing that houses do, you know, when they like whisper, like you're lying in bed and they're like, No, I know what you're talking about. It's like that, like reverberate. It's like the empty.
Yeah, it's just like the empty room thing. Yeah, we still have all of the art on the walls here because I hate that so much.
Yeah. Empty tables and like from Les Mis and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, in terms of news that's coming up in the Sigil world, I know one of the most exciting things that's coming up is S5E. Obviously done. But I think we are starting to deliver some of those S5E rewards starting next week. I know, which is so exciting. And that's something that you can start looking forward to if you have backed to Kickstarter. If you haven't backed to Kickstarter, make sure you check it out on Kickstarter. And you can find a little link to find another way that you can sort of get in on the DL, aka down low, to make sure that you can get in and find out, how to purchase it. Because you don't want to miss out. I mean, miss out if you want. I don't give a shit. You do you. But look, it's great. We run a game every Monday. S5E will be starting again this coming Monday, Chapter 7 right now. We're throwing out new, like all the classes that are in the game, a bunch of cool spells, and some great gear that we're sort of making up on the fly as it comes. I just gave one of our players a cloak that is sort of is like non-Newtonian, where like it's very stiff when you move it fast, so it's kind of like this idea of you could throw it in front of yourself and maybe stop a bullet or something like that, just to have a little flavor. And the setting is rife with things like that, so if you like creating a lot of stuff like that, then it's a wonderful setting to check out and to feel powerful. And who doesn't want to feel powerful all the time? What else is on the agenda?
Let's see. The problem is like there's a lot of stuff right now that's like it's not done yet. We don't have confirmed release dates. We don't have the final paperwork signed and all this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming and it will be really exciting, but we can't talk about it yet. And it's kind of frustrating because I'm really excited to share it with you guys.
The best part about Sigil Spotlight is just us talking about the shit that we can't talk about yet. No, I'm kidding. There's a lot of stuff, but that's the nature of Kickstarters. And believe me, you guys are going to hear a lot of this kind of stuff. However, what our guest today is going to be talking about, not only their own work and the amazing sort of impact they've had on this community, but also some of the stuff that they can allude to as well, that they're going to be working on for S5E. It's going to be really exciting as well. And we're going to bring them on in just a second. But again, we want to make sure that we get through all the news and all the boring stuff, so then we don't have to worry about touting anything out after the fact. Is there anything else, Ellen? I think beyond the next week and sort of the incubation phase, is that what we should call it?
Yeah, I guess kind of. There's a lot of stuff like with VTT. Like we're hard at work. I have stuff I have to go do for a project after the stream, but like again, it's all secret right now.
All secret. Keep it secret. Keep it safe, as we all know. Obi-Wan Kenobi says. But the idea of having all this stuff in the metamorphosis phase, I suppose, is the way to put it, as it's growing and continuing, is really exciting. So I hope you are all on pins and needles. And without further ado, I think we should bring on our guest for today, an extremely talented veteran game designer from this industry, Mr. John Wick.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome to the show, friend. How are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm doing okay, considering that, things.
Yeah.
The world, man. The world today. Absolutely on fire, burning, and we're just watching it burn, and it's a blast to do it. I see you got a great background there. You got some drums, as Ellen pointed out before.
Yep.
Playing a band or just sort of casually right now?
I have played in bands.
Nice.
Wow,
Nice.
But I have, since COVID started, I decided to start practicing things. So I have been practicing this.
Hey!
Oh, nice.
I have also been, it's way down here. I've also been practicing this.
Keyboard,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
I play
So you're
piano.
trying to form the one-man band style, like create your own, tracks and get all the...
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
Not
That's the plan.
not what's his name from Mary Poppins, the guy who can't do Cockney for shit. What the hell's it?
Oh,
Dick
gosh.
Van Dyke.
Yes.
Dick Van Dyke, that's it. You're not trying to do Dick Van Dyke style, are you? Where you're like,
No, I'm not that coordinated.
You gotta be impressed by that level of commitment for the people who do that. Just
Yeah.
keep that time. It's kind of
It's
awesome.
a particular skill. Drumming requires a weird kind of coordination that I do not have. I am a punk rock drummer with prog rock aspirations.
Nice.
But
There you go.
I play 4/4 really good. I play 3/4 okay. Try to get me to do 5/4 or 7/4. Just forget it. It's not going to happen.
So no take 5.
No.
That's exciting, though. I mean, honestly, I find so many of us, especially during COVID times, became so much more interested in developing certain hobbies. Like you just said, you picked up the guitar and the piano and stuff like that. I think that's so true, not only about all of us here, but other people that we had on the show talking about what they've been doing during COVID times and new skills they've learned. And, I think Kevin was talking about how he's cooking more and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see how many of those things have grown over the years. But that's not what you're here for. What you're here for is to talk about the awesome work you do, as well as the work you're doing on S5E. So I guess first and foremost, can you give us a little tidbit or a little bit of information about your role in the upcoming superhero releases and sort of what drew you to it?
Yeah, I'm writing essentially what started off as an adventure, just a simple adventure. But when I started writing it, it's not. It's small. It's a few thousand words. But I got inspired to do something where the setting was important. And so the idea of what if social justice warrior Galactus showed up. And social justice warrior Galactus is Galactus, or I should say not Galactus, but Thanos, right?
Okay.
In that he is super concerned with people. He's super concerned with their well-being, and he's super concerned with them being empowered and all these other things. And he does it all the wrong way because he's still Thanos, right?
Yeah.
So he feels like he feels like he's doing the right thing, but he's not, because the most interesting villains of all time, like this guy here. This is the greatest villain of all time.
Dr. Doom.
He calls you adult. And the reason that Dr. Doom is the greatest villain of all time is not that he's a mad scientist, is not that he's in powered armor, is not that he's a wizard. The reason that he's the greatest villain of all time is because his motivation is getting his mother's soul out of hell.
It's a noble motivation.
I mean, that's a heroic thing, right? I want to get my
Absolutely.
mom's soul out of hell. I'm going to, and to do it, I'm going to conquer the world, right?
I mean, I totally agree. The motivations of a supervillain that feel just, or that feel like you want them to succeed, but the way they're doing it. And again, you know, it's clever to sort of take a sort of more modern approach to extreme leftism. Extremism in any sense is dangerous. And I think we're so used to seeing extreme examples of the right wing that it's interesting to see what a character can do with having such positive reasoning behind, you know, acceptance and taking it too far. And that's a really cool take to see how people can sort of take that villain, quote unquote, down, you know, heroic motivations at the cost of humanity.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful
and
of that.
heroic motivations at the cost of humanity. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so he shows up, he conquers the world, and in doing so, he kills all of the superheroes.
Oof.
Right?
Okay.
And because they're clearly causing problems. They're vigilantes, they're breaking the law, they're running around in masks.
Yeah.
If you're running around in a mask, you're not doing something right.
Very
clearly.
true.
Yeah.
You know, take Batman, for example, who's going to punch the world in the face until it gives him his mommy and daddy back. Right?
Yeah, for real.
Clearly a man with
that, though.
with
Yeah, the
issues.
danger that they're taking. Yeah.
Oh, actually, he doesn't have issues. Batman has subscriptions. Okay. So, you know, let's get rid of all the superheroes. And my character, his power is that he can touch you and steal your powers.
Mm.
So that's essentially what he did. He went around and he touched everybody and stole all their powers. So he is the most powerful person on Earth now. And he's running everything. And he's running everything in the way that he feels is best for humanity. And being not even human, that's kind of a problem. But so the game is about being the last crew of superheroes, people who have superpowers left. And how do you deal with this?
Yeah.
And that's what the adventure is.
Well, it's an interesting onset of a villain too, because, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. But I mean, so many times there's this archetypical, you know, Nazi analog, you know, where their views are so espoused in hatred and fervor that there's no real benefit to even trying to talk to them. Whereas when you present a character whose motivations do have grounding in something that, you know, I think socially we accept as a more progressive, positive view.
Yep.
That, to me, immediately as a role player, my mind goes to, okay, this is now a villain that my first objective is to get in front of, not to necessarily destroy. Because I feel like there's so much more, so many different options that you can take with a character like that you're interested in sort of trying to talk some sense into, rather than trying to explain why all of a certain type of, you know, race are bad or something like that. You know, you take a Red Skull, it's like, you're not going to knock any sense into that dude. Like, it doesn't really matter because he's just going to do what he do. You just need to kill him. Whereas someone like this, you almost want to try to take that approach. And I love a scenario or an adventure in any nature that gives a clear option to the player, because of course they could go out and destroy it, but from the onset you're introduced with the option of, okay, but there could be another way to play this.
Yeah.
I mean, I myself identify, if you call me a social justice warrior, I'd be like, I'm actually a social justice thief, but that's fine. I'll take warrior, right? Or a social justice bard. I'll take that too, right? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take something that I associated with a positive virtue and then push it as far as it would go, and where it's still recognizable, but clearly, you know, like, hey, wait a minute, you got to take it back a few steps. And in his case, he's got to take it back a few kilometers, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think that's important because it means you're coming from an informed place. You're not satirizing this because you don't understand it. You're satirizing it because you live it. And I think that's a really important distinction when you have characters and you're trying to espouse inclusivity, but you're having someone write them that has no understanding or, you know, doesn't have any foot in that world. Then all you're doing is you're doing a poor representation of that. But if you're creating a villain that you yourself, you know, that espouses the feelings that you have just in a more extreme way, then at least you're writing them with without that level of, satirization that I think can undercut the message in the end,
When I was in high school and college, I was a big anarchist, and not like,
Not physically.
I mean, like legitimate political anarchy.
Yeah.
And I bumped into Alan Moore's V for Vendetta when it was still in black and white in Warrior magazine from Britain, being imported by my comic store.
Cool.
Okay.
And being a big Alan Moore fan, it's like his, V for Vendetta is what he calls his love letter to anarchy. And V, not the movie V, who only like wears the same costume, but the actual character in the book is not an easy character to like. He's violent. He has a means to an end, and there are times when he is almost inhuman, and not like Superman is. Like, wow, I can't believe you actually did that.
Yeah.
I may put this comic down for a couple of weeks and come back to it when I'm okay now. There's a and it's in the film too, but there's a moment in the comic when I was like, whoa, that may have been just too far.
Yeah.
And while I'm sympathizing with the character and his motivations, and one of the things Moore wanted to do was to say, okay, what happens if I make the protagonist something that I agree with politically, something I sympathize with, but he's really the antagonist.
Yeah.
And all of the fascists are actually like real people.
Yeah.
And it was an exercise for him to go, okay, how do I sympathize with the other side?
Which is an important lesson, especially in today's, to sort of be able to see our own faults, coming from the Justice Warrior sort of side of things, And again, Alan Moore excelled at that. Rorschach was very much meant to be a detestable sort of villain. And you had, when you're younger, you're kind of like, that's the guy I want to be, Rorschach. And then you grow up and you're like, oh no, Rorschach's a shitty person. And you don't want to be Rorschach. And the people who want to be Rorschach miss the message a little bit. You know what I mean? Not to say he's not cool, because at the end of the day, look, comic books are cool and anyone in them is cool to an extent. But, having that ability to mirror your views from a writer's standpoint, the same way you just said Alan Moore did, is important. And I think that sounds like a really exciting villain. So is the adventure going to take them on sort of a particular location, or is it primarily right now you're sort of just, the synopsis is that's sort of the meat and potatoes of what's going to happen?
So I want to, because I don't like linear adventures. Because as a game master, like I've written in Play Dirty, which is my super unorthodox GM advice column, which turned into books. No GM plan survives contact with the players. Right? So don't have a plan. That's, why even have a plan when you know that you're going to say, okay, now we're going to go here, and the players have 100% valid move to say, screw that, we're going over here. Right? What can you do? You can shove them back onto your plan, but they're going to resent that. Right? So instead of having a plan, what you do is you have contingencies. You throw them things and say, okay, which of these do you want to do? And because now they have a choice, they go, oh, well, we're going to go and do this thing. You're like, okay, now I know where you're going and what you're going to do. And so for the adventure, what I decided to do was, there are like 6 different things that you can do to try to deal with it, to find solutions to this problem. And here they are. Here are the 6 different things that you can throw at the players and say, all right, since he absorbed this world's version of Superman, who is actually a magical Superman, he's more like the Shazam Captain Marvel, who is Magic Superman, right? Magic Superman has his version of kryptonite. Will the kryptonite work on what he's called the Taker? Will it work on the Taker? We don't know. He absorbed his powers. Did he absorb his weaknesses too?
Okay.
And does he know about Magic Superman's kryptonite?
Yeah. It's so interesting to dive into that world and break down those sort of questions, to sort of use them again in a way, and sort of repurpose them and then apply them to new stories. And it's fascinating to see, obviously, somebody as accomplished as yourself to get to dive into that. Yeah. Oh, here, let me just fan you with these.
So your approach go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Ellen, go ahead.
So your approach on writing that out is to basically try and present all these different questions. Like, does he get these weaknesses? Does the interactions between the powers introduce something new or whatever? Essentially provide scenarios, situations that ask those different questions, and then see which one your particular party grabs onto.
Yeah. It's like our version of Batman clearly had a bat computer.
Okay.
Right. Let's go find the bat computer. Now, we don't know where Batman, we know that he was in this particular city, and all my stuff takes place in real cities. So, so it's like, clearly, because Batman had a plan for everything. Mm-hmm. Did he have a plan for this? Let's go find out. That's one of the other things. So all of these are different ways of dealing with the problem, and then present all of them to the players, so the players can go, okay, we're going to try A and B, and we'll go from there. Now, what's going to happen is that players are going to they're going to run into this part of the adventure, and because players are thinking, and there's 5 or 6 of them, and just one of you, what they're going to do is they're going to come up with a solution that is better than the one that the adventure offers you. That's what's going to happen, right? Absolutely. So say yes, right? So because the old GM rule is say yes or roll dice. Mm-hmm. So
true. I mean, it's improv based,
it is improv. So
the minute you start saying no, you're just shutting down options for yourself.
Yeah, saying no to players is boring. And it discourages them from coming up with creative solutions. You want them to come up with creative solutions. And when one of the big secrets of game mastering is, I really don't know how you guys are going to solve this, but I'm sure you will. Right? And so they show up and they come up and they're like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they'll come up with all these things that you didn't even think of, even though I've offered you all of these different, things to play with. But they'll come up with, oh, what if we go and get Wonder Woman's lasso? Is Wonder Woman's lasso still around? Mm-hmm. And I'll go, yes, of course it is. No one's found it. Mm-hmm. Right. So they'll go and I didn't think of that. That's not one of the 6 things I thought of. It is actually, but it's not one of the 6 things I thought of. So yes, go and do that. And now you're playing on the fly like a GM should. And you just keep saying yes until you're like, I don't know, and then you have them roll dice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've talked about it here too, actually, a few times with particularly puzzles, such as the one we'll do in a little bit. The amount of times the players come up with a better solution than the solution you intended for the puzzle is just a matter of fact. So you're just like, yeah, that was my solution. And Jesse just said it here. It's a great GM philosophy. Let the story truly be created by all the players involved. And it's interesting, because there's so many different ways to play RPGs, as we've seen. And I absolutely agree with everything you're saying for the vast majority of games. And then there are other games where I do think a little bit more structure. If they're trying to solve a mystery and you want to have certain things quantifiable, then it's important for them to be able to have that ability to find something in the world to be wrong in that case too. So it also depends on what kind of story you're playing. In a superhero adventure where the walls are by nature sort of no longer there, because at any point Superman can just hop up and fly to the far side of the map, it's so imperative to have that kind of thinking, because you need to be able to, have them truly with that freedom,
Well, even with murder mysteries or mysteries in general, the way I generally handle them is like in Houses of the Blooded, which is the shirt I'm wearing, which we talked about before.
We'll talk about it some more. Don't you worry.
The way that I run mysteries generally is you walk into a room and there's a dead body, and the dead body it's Mr. Body, and and then I turn to each of the players and I go, "What's a clue that you find in the room?"
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so it goes around, and in houses and in 7th Sea, the way it works is that you roll dice and the dice tell you how many things you can say. So someone who has a really high intelligence in investigation, for example, is going to get a big bonus to their roll. So the roll is going to let Sherlock Holmes say a lot of things, but it's not going to let Shark King say a lot of things because hand, that's
Suicide Squad.
What's that?
Sylvester Stallone. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
Have you seen that already?
I have.
Did you like it?
I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Ellen, have you seen Suicide Squad yet?
I have not. No,
I won't say anything then.
Well, I'll say this. My partner Jessica is not a big fan of grim dark or edgy. She's like, why would I read books and I see movies to laugh and have fun. As a matter of fact, The Rock had an interview where he said, I have depression and I do not go to movies to feel sad. I go to movies to come out the other side laughing and feeling better about myself and other people.
Mm-hmm.
And Jessica said, I'm going to see every single one of his movies because that's how I feel. So Suicide Squad, the new Suicide Squad movie is like, it's a Suicide Squad movie. Like the first 5 minutes, half the cast dies.
Awesome.
Right.
Okay.
It's
Well, let me put this
Suicide
back
Squad movie, but there's a moment in the third act and I can identify the exact second. And Harlan, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Where it turns into a Jessica movie.
Okay.
Yeah, where it's with Taiki Waititi or whatever his name is. And I don't want to give anything away. He's involved in the moment, more or less. But yeah, I mean, it's an excellent movie, honestly.
What's James Gunn?
Okay.
James Gunn is a phenomenal creator.
I trust him.
I do too. After Slither, which was pretty early on, I was like, oh yeah, this dude's got it. I know what I enjoy about this dude's movies, and he treats them like movies, but not in like a David Lynch way where you're very clearly watching an actor act, but like more like a way that you're on a ride and you're having fun with it. Almost like a James Cameron way, but way less serious, where it's just an experience that you're kind of going on and you're getting a laugh out of it.
I almost would say it's almost like we used to call them like air conditioner movies, where like they're a good time and you go to the theater to see them and you go to see them multiple times even because you're enjoying the air conditioner and yes, fun stuff is happening. And like
yeah, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, and I would say it's an air conditioner movie on a swelteringly hot day because it is not only just a good popcorn flick, but I do think it had meat on the bones, which I think is the 1-2 punch that James Gunn offers. Because like I said, I rewatched Guardians of the Galaxy, and then I was like, because when I first watched them, I was like, I like these, they're fine, they're good, and then I watched them again, I was like, nah, these are like good movies. Like this is that father and son at the end of volume 2, with the cat demons and all the shit exploding. You're like, oh man, this is good. This is good. I'm like sitting there with my son tearing up. I'm like, yeah, okay. I get it. This is like well done, and somebody
brings the feels.
What's that?
He brings the feels.
He does.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, whether it be horror or action or comedy, feeling is what the movies are meant to be instilling in us. It just depends on what feeling you want to check off that day. And I absolutely agree that James Gunn, and he did a superhero movie too, which was super dark. Well, pretty dark and depressing for a lot of it. But was also really good too. And if you haven't seen a superhero movie, watch. I think it's called Super, isn't it?
It's called Super.
Yeah, with not Dwight Yoakam, Dwight from The Office. What the hell's his name? Rainn Wilson. Yeah,
Rainn Wilson and
Elliot Page. And Kevin Bacon. Isn't Kevin Bacon the bad guy in it?
I want to say yes, but I can't say for certain.
I think he is. I can't remember. But either way, it's also a good movie. A little bit more like under the radar for his. Anyway, that was a bit off topic, but it is still superheroes, so it still had a bit of the connecting.
It was a tangent, not off topic.
Well, it's funny because people tell me like it's a superhero movie. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything if you read comics and are familiar with superhero movies. It's like saying it's superhero movie is like is like saying there are superheroes in it.
Yeah, like Beetlejuice is a superhero movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like any number of characters with powers. That I got Ellen thinking on that one.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, all right.
Right? I don't know. I said it without thinking or hearing it before, so I have to process it myself. Like, I think so. Like he's got powers. He's like
Yeah,
you know,
I feel like it's a little bit more of like an anti superhero movie. You know, like not.
Well,
but yeah, no.
superheroes. I mean, like Loki is a superhero. You know what I mean? I guess it really.
Yeah. No, it's
how
just
broad
like
you
that
wanna
whole
be on it.
like just in terms of like the character arc and stuff like that feels more like an anti-hero arc than like a hero's journey sort of arc through that movie.
Wait till Beetlejuice 2 comes out, then we'll find out. Then the
There we
full
go.
arc will be complete, and we'll see. I mean, if Michael Keaton's in it, I'm paying. Doesn't really matter. There's a few actors and actresses that, regardless of what they're doing, I'm usually lining up, and I'm like,
Yeah, at the very least, I'm gonna like watch the trailer and put it on the list, even if I'm like, okay, I gotta wait for the right mood for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Keaton's always one of those. I so respect that dude.
But have you guys read Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing?
No,
Not.
tell us about it.
So it was kind of where he got his fame is he got put in charge of Swamp Thing back when the book was bi-monthly and wasn't selling very well. And this is like the story of every like really good comic creator, is that you get somebody who's super creative and they get put in charge of a comic that isn't doing very well. It was the same thing with Daredevil with Frank Miller. That's how he got started before he went crazy. And Alan Moore got put in charge of Swamp Thing. And the gimmick of Swamp Thing is that he was a botanist, an experimental botanist who got blown up in a swamp and then became this creature, and he's trying to become human again. Right.
Okay.
And Alan Moore said, okay, this is not going to work because the reader is smart enough to know that Alec Holland is never going to become human again, because as soon as that happens, there's no more Swamp Thing comic.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, what he did is he said, there is no more Alec Holland, and Swamp Thing is just like a remnant of Alec Holland's intelligence. And Swamp Thing is something completely different. It is not Alec Holland mutated into a monster. And it's the swamp absorbed his intelligence. And so he is an avatar of the swamp.
Cool.
And then
entirely.
Yeah, so entirely different. And then he had John Constantine show up because he created John Constantine. And John Constantine shows up and he goes, "You're a plant god."
Cool.
Oh.
And then it goes to the races.
Yeah.
It gets crazy. And it's a book about preservation, nature preservation, about love, about like all these things that you would like, this is not what comic books are.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan Moore like made them about all of those things. There's a story in one of them where swamp, like a fruit falls off of Swamp Thing, and a guy who goes into the swamp looking for orchids finds it and brings it back, and he cuts it into pieces and gives it to friends of his. And the stories about what happens when they eat it. And what happens is, in one of his friends he gave it to, he's like, I don't know what this is, and it may, you know, and his wife is dying of terminal cancer. She's on her last months on terminal cancer, and out of desperation, he gives it to his wife, hoping that'll have some kind of curative thing. And the story, when you get done, whenever I read it, it's right over here on my shelf. Whenever I read it, I just cry.
Yeah.
Because it's so, I'm like, and I read, and back in 1989, 87 is when he was doing this. And it was like, so there's Batman, and there's Superman, and there's Green Lantern, and there's the Hulk, and there's Captain America. And then there's the comic that makes me cry.
Yeah. Swamp Thing.
Right. Swamp Thing. It's
Crazy to think about.
read the Alan Moore Swamp Things. You will never look at superhero comics the same way ever again. They're
Have you,
fantastic.
so do you take something like that idea, and try to not reskin it, you know, but like, do you strip something like that down, this idea of rebooting something that's traditional, and rework it? Do you ever apply that to your own work, and maybe you do a draft of something and then sort of strip it down and say, no, hold on, let me retake that? You know, what are the lessons that you learn from a comic that makes you cry?
That you got to bring the feels. right? You gotta you look. Most role playing games are you kick down the door, you kill the monster, you go through its pockets for spare change, so you can buy bigger weapons to kill bigger monsters, and kick down bigger doors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's Talisman. I can play Talisman. It's a board game. It's over on my shelf. I can play it whenever I want. And while I play it, I can engage with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's my turn? Okay. Right. In a role-playing game, if your players pick up the phone, you have done something wrong. Right? You have disengaged the player from the cooperative storytelling that's going on. You want people engaged, you want them talking to each other, you want them throwing ideas back and forth at each other. And especially in game systems that allow the players to have an amount of narrative control, where and I was doing this for a long time until I bumped into Jared Sorensen, who like made a mechanic out of it. But it was when I was running like World of Darkness games back in the late 80s, early 90s, and my players would meet an NPC, and I would say, tell me something about this NPC. Right. So everybody gets to say something about the NPC. It was just something I was doing. And then I bumped into Jared Sorensen at a convention, and he showed me Octane. And in his game, if you roll low, the GM says what happens next. And if you roll high, the player says what happens next.
Interesting.
And that's it. That's the mechanic. Rolling isn't for success or failure. Rolling is who gets the conch.
Interesting.
Right.
It's interesting. Yeah.
And
you drop a rock on Piggy's head and it's all over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then it is all downhill from there.
And then you just log, and then 10-year-old me just cry, and then you bring the feels
right? And when you have game systems that allow the players to take narrative control for a turn and say, and then this happens next, they have to be paying attention. Because if you get to the guy with the phone and they go, what?
Yeah.
Okay, now we have to stop and catch you up on what's going on and all these other things, right? So whenever a game does that, and I follow the Mr. Miyagi rule from the Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi said there's no such thing as bad students, only bad teachers. The teacher says do this, and the student does that, right? So the Mr. Miyagi rule applied to role-playing games is there's no such thing as bad players, only bad games. The game says do this, and the players do it because that's the rules. And so when a game has a whiff factor, which is I'm playing a character who's the best thief in the world, it says so on my character sheet. I am the thief of this party. Nobody else can do what I can do here. The wizard can't do what I do. The fighter can't do what I do. I am the thief. And I roll a 1. Well, the game just said, you are not the best thief in the world. As a matter of fact, you suck. And I go, okay. Because in game design circles, I think that most game designers will agree the worst mechanic of all time, the laziest, most boring, disenfranchising mechanic is lose a turn. When you lose a turn, you are disengaged. The game is telling you don't play the game. That's what it's saying. It's saying you don't get to play. Okay, what was this week's episode of The Expanse like?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what happens. You've seen it, right? You're both gamers. You've seen it where people start talking about television, or they say, have you seen Suicide Squad? Or let's go see Free Guy today, or, whatever. Right.
Yeah. They disengage because that's so fair. And I think we've all had rounds like that once or twice, at least in our lives, where you're like, okay, well, I miss and okay, I guess I'll do nothing. Like, I can't move now because there's a guy up there and I can't do that. And I definitely recognize that as something that I think is a pitfall when you're trying to make a game that is engaging the audience 100% of the time. It's interesting, because there's sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
No. You're good. So we just had a mechanic like this actually in ours game. We're playing Eye of the Stone Thief from Pelgrane Press for 13th Age. And at one point in it, there's a mechanic that they bring in where you're doing this library fight. And one of the monsters, the only thing they can do is make you read from a book. And the mechanic is you literally have to open up a book and you have to read the page out loud, and you get a roll at the end of every page. And if you fail your save, then you have to keep reading. And while you're reading, that's all you're doing. You don't get to go do anything. So it is, you lose a turn, but the mechanic also specifies you have to do this other thing instead. And we were having a lot of discussion after we played it about how does this work, and would this work at a table versus VTT, and the differences in how to use that and how often can you use something like that. And it was just this really interesting discussion about essentially a lose a turn mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is that fun?
Our conclusion was it was okay as a one-off for this particular fight. It would have been better in person, because then you would have actually been able to like take your book and step away from the table, so you aren't clogging the airspace from the people who can still play. Because when we were on VTT, so all on voice chat, like we were like, you couldn't hear anything because everyone had, you know, equal mics and everything like that. So you couldn't just like whisper, your mic would automatically boost you up to the same volume as everyone else. And so it was, I thought it was a fun short gimmick. They only had like, each of the monsters that had it only had like one casting of it. So like you only got it a certain amount of times in the overall fight and then moved on. But it was definitely kind of a like, all right, let's not do that again. Like it was a good experiment. Let's not revisit it. But it was but it was an interesting way to address that lose a turn mechanic, because it was, okay, you lose a combat turn, but you're doing something else. So it didn't give you the opportunity.
I think the idea of keeping them engaged in or like having some sort of physical, like I've done something like that, but never in missing a turn. Like when I've run Call of Cthulhu, there's an element of Call of Cthulhu, you know, usually in the ending where you're like summoning or you're banishing a creature, that I always think is sort of a fun mechanic, but it's less interesting to say, okay, I'll read from the book this round. So I've had them be like, okay, and usually it's like it's with a combat as well. So I'll kind of have each of the players doing a combat as they're passing around, especially at a convention. I'll do it where I'm passing around like a bit of Latin text that they have to keep reading, and if they stop, well then you know the enchantment goes, and it's meant to build up momentum and to keep them involved while the other players are fighting, because I find Call of Cthulhu combat the worst combat ever. So you know, there's like a few rolls. Is it good? Okay, yeah, hit. You're good. Okay, you keep reading. Okay, pass it. It's not your turn anymore. You go, just to kind of have that level of, but it's the opposite intention. It's meant to be more engaging rather than this big climactic battle, and you're just waiting for your turn to fight this beast. You know, to me, it's such an easy way to disassociate in that moment, as John's saying, where you're like, okay, cool, well, I'll just wait for my turn. It's like, no, you don't get to wait for your turn. You got to read from this ancient tome to keep the portal open. Otherwise, what are you going to do? It's going to shut. And talking about all this is reminding me of a game that I was a big fan of and recently came out. And I'm curious if you played it or heard of it, John. It was the adaptation, or if you've seen the movie, the RPG adaptation of The Green Knight. Have you seen this or heard this or run this?
You can't see it, but it's back there. Yeah, I saw the movie.
Yeah.
I still have really mixed feelings about the movie.
I haven't seen it yet, so don't say anything, because I don't want to
say anything about the movie. Well, it's everything you like about the Green Knight role-playing game is in Pendragon.
Yeah, I kind of knew it was. Because I know the creator.
Which is the perfect role-playing game.
Well, I was going to say, so I played it knowing nothing about it. And the author, Tim Woods, who's now a good friend, because after we ran it, I talked to him and I was like, this game's great. I loved it first and foremost because I thought it was a really, honestly, beautiful game. I thought the way, especially with the players that we took it, because, you know, I sort of talked about what the nature of it was, and they all took it really seriously and really contemplated. And the ending was absolutely beautiful the way they ran it too, because they just were conflicted with what to do at the end. And no spoilers, but the actual game I thought was such a wonderful, engaging experience that I do think was narratively driven. I mean, don't get me wrong, within the scenes, the players had whatever they wanted to do, but more or less they were aware they were in this fable, and it did have sort of a linear structure. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that in a moment where the players' onus is on their soul or their courage, or like where they're more insular or more thinking about just their character, and how you view that in a role-playing sense.
Well, I think it's essential to I think it's necessary in a philosophical sense. If you aren't if you aren't engaged in the story and your character's motivations and things, then why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can play a board game. You
Well,
know, you
that's
can play Descent, which is, you know, the D&D board game. So I know you're familiar with Matt Colville. Matt and I used to chat all the time, and still do from time to time. But I was saying, I said, really, I mean, went back when I wrote an essay called "Chess is Not an RPG," and in it was a reaction to people saying, you know, that's not a role playing game, like the Baron Munchausen role playing game.
Oh,
Right. And the Baron Munchausen role playing game is essentially a storytelling game with drinking, betting, and fighting, and all these other things. And when it came out, people were like, "That's not a role playing game." And so I wrote an essay after years of this, and I was like, you know what? D&D isn't a role playing game, because in no point in D&D, and I wrote this before 5th edition. In no point in D&D does the game reward you for role playing, and that's what distinguishes a role playing game from a board game, is that it rewards you for saying, my character wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It rewards you for taking a suboptimal decision because it is consistent with your character's character.
so an interesting.
And so Matt, I was talking to Matt, and because Matt had read the essay, and he was like, "You're joking about this." I was like, "No, I'm not joking." And we talked about it, and I said, "Look, what's the difference between D&D and Talisman?" And he said, "No, John, you should not." In Matt's way, he's like, "You should not. That's not the right comparison. You should be asking me, what's the difference between D&D and Descent?" And I said, "Okay, what is the difference between D&D and Descent? One of them is a role-playing game, and the other one is a board game. What's the difference?" And Matt kind of like, "Screw you." Because the answer is, there is no difference. Right? Chess can be a role-playing game if you give your pieces names and motivations. But that's not in the rules.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, I can play D&D like a board game. I don't have to role play. There is nothing in the rules that rewards me for role playing, encourages me to role play. Nothing at all. I can play D&D as a board game. We're going to move our miniatures on the map and get points and level up. Where's the role playing in that? Oh, well, that's not part of the game. We put it on there. I said, "Oh, so you're playing chess." It's the same thing.
Ellen, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like with this, how do you compare that then with, I guess, there's kind of a parallel that's what happens with video games and RPGs, where essentially it's so written in the track, they can't force you to be like, okay, so how immersed are you really? They can't really measure that through the screen, but they still consider themselves, an RPG. It's still considered a role-playing game because a lot of those still have the base idea of you are supposed to immerse yourself and invest yourself in this character and build it out the way that you want. So how do you, like, we have RPG essentially meaning like several different things.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you slot some of those like video game things in, like the video game concept of an RPG in with this idea of chess versus board game versus an actual, like, I guess, tabletop role-playing game, except then we're using the same word to mean two different things again. It's like we're missing a
computer role-playing game, what that essentially means, like Doom, not Doom, the Blizzard game. Sorry, what?
Diablo?
Diablo is defined as a role-playing game because you level up.
Mm-hmm.
You have a character and you level up. That is like the definition of a computer role-playing game, right?
But like,
is leveling up.
How would you compare, like, say, are you familiar with like Divinity Original Sin?
No, but I am familiar with Mass Effect.
Okay.
Similar, yeah.
And Mass Effect
games, but also
to me, Mass Effect 2, 1 is fun and 3 is disappointing, but Mass Effect 2 where your choices actually change how characters interact with you and the story that you have to such an extent. Like I said, Jessica was playing Mass Effect and I was playing Mass Effect, and I was watching her play and she was watching me play, and we were like, I didn't see that scene. I didn't get that dialogue. Like the differences that you get in the game based on your choices are huge. They are huge. And I think for me, the big disappointment in Mass Effect 3 is that it was like, nope, this is
Much more narrow.
the choice that everybody gets, right?
Well, and I think that's it. I think a role-playing game, to me, when I sit down and play a video game, which I play a ton of, it's like you're sitting into a role. You are inhabiting this character, Bishop, and you are seeing their story. And you can make choices within that story, but ultimately, you don't have the agency to create and function as you truly want to. The limitless freedom of an RPG, a pen and paper style, to me, ultimately depends on the GM. Ultimately, if I could say it a third time, like, I think for me, regardless of system, I'm always going to be a player in GM that thrusts role playing into the hands of the players, or I'm going to put it on myself. And I remember playing games like Descent and or Gloomhaven before we would play an RPG, and just thrusting role playing on those encounters that me and my partner would have as we're playing. I'd be like, oh, I'm playing like a thief character, so I think in this scene this is what he says, and we're just making role playing. There's a great quote that Stanley Kubrick said, I think, that has always been famous in my mind for many different situations. However vast the darkness, we must supply our own light. And to me, it's giving purpose to the things that are meaningless or purposeless, or giving meaning to the things that have no meaning. And whether it be a board game or a role-playing game that doesn't give you the opportunity, I thrust my own meaning into it. I give my characters a background and a soul and a reason to do that, and then I wedge my moments in, whether they like
You're
it
the
or
guy
not.
who shows up with the backstory.
No, because most of the time I'll still start the game with nothing, and I'll be like, whatever, I'm going to play this, and then
But
I
you
will.
wanna build that,
I will
yeah.
let. I'm 100% one of those people that lets the influences and decisions craft my character. To a frustrating degree sometimes, where we'll be walking along some dusty road and I'll be like, oh yeah, no, I grew up in Faerun and I know everybody there or whatever, or I know 6 guys there or something, and they're like, well, who do you know? It's like, oh, this guy. Just adds something to the world that's not directly conflicting with the GM's desires for a story, but also giving so much more context. And I think a lot of this is about the relationship between the GM and the players, and your onus as a player to want to bring that to a story. Because I think if you are sitting down to a table and the GM says, okay, this is how we're playing it, and you don't agree with that, then you don't have to sit down, because there are people that play D&D like a board game. And as much as it's never a game I want to sit down to play, I think one of the beautiful things about role-playing games is you can. Wargaming and all that kind of stuff, the idea that people only want the numbers and figures and don't want to add a lot of soul and character into that, great. Play it that way if you want. But for me, I'm going to definitely want to sit down to a table that either encourages that or has a system designed for that, to give me the freedom to feel like there are benefits to doing it, or to give me the space to be a ham without any sort of real penalty.
You can't have all hams, though. You got to have.
I love ham. I mean, it depends if it's Canadian bacon as we have it. It's very different, very salty.
At the very least, you guys got to be willing to share.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
no, you can't have a party with all goofs.
So both of you said something really interesting in that little exchange. Ellen, you said that you're the guy who shows up with the backstory, right? And then Harlan, you said that you sit down because the game master has a story he wants to tell you. Okay, so the reason I like Jared Sorensen's, like, why do vampire players have 24-page backgrounds? And his answer is because that's the last time you have a say in anything that's about to happen.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. The longest backstory that I ever wrote for a character was a GM that I knew. I was walking into a group that I knew that they already were playing. They were technically playing like Dungeons and Dragons, the system, but the game they were actually playing was Beat the GM. Yeah. And so the only time that I was ever going to get to actually like have a say on the world and stuff like that was in that backstory that I turned in.
Because the GM is telling you a story. Okay, that's bullshit. I was on Satine Phoenix's GM Advice YouTube show, and I said something that was off the top of my head, and since then it's become a mantra of mine, which is, it is not the GM's job to tell you a story. The GM's job is to help you tell your characters' stories. And what I mean by that is, like, when we first started talking, it's like, okay, I have this plot, and you're going to go down the plot to the ending that I have predetermined. Okay, well, screw you, buddy. Go write a novel.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in sitting down and having you tell me about all the, like, no. We're here to cooperatively tell a story, and none of us knows where it's going. To me, that, even as a GM, that's much more interesting.
I agree with you, except I know there are people that do like to be told a story as well. And I think
I do like, I like to be not told a story, but presented a story.
Well, and this is what I mean, and this is more what I'm saying, that there is such an array of people who enjoy so many different things, that's to me what's so beautiful about role-playing games. Because absolutely, I want to sit down sometimes and be as instrumental in that ending as every other player, as the GM. I want to be involved in the way the world is created, and, you know, powered by the apocalypse and all this kind of stuff gives us the options to create. And then sometimes I sit down wanting to figure out exactly why this body died here, or what that means, or where they lived and how. And I want it to feel meaningful, like a story. And I do want to be interacting, walking through this narrative landscape that people have created. And a good GM can still involve my backstory in that as well. And I totally understand the desire to push back against that, because I think so much of this hobby has been ingrained in this idea that a GM needs to sit down and tell a story, and we need to sit down and listen. And that is absolutely why the pushback that you're giving is necessary, because we're still trying to dismantle that wall to an extent. However, there are really good, like, and Green Knight is a great example. There is an end to that, you know, but the players' decisions throughout it are so much more enriching. And the way that you can, but of course that game has a final scene. It has an act 1, 2, 3. And yet, even though you're walking through a story that, as you said, is no different than the one that sort of appears on the screen, I felt so immersed in the tale being told. And to me, that's the beauty of such a wide landscape that we have, and why we get to feel so passionate about shooting down these preconceived norms so that we can build better games like that, you know? And it's funny, because I can agree with everything you're saying and also feel totally different about it at certain times, because that's, sometimes I absolutely want to sit down and just want to fuck around. And so that was our PG-13. Shit, we only get one. So
I was wondering. I didn't ask about the because when Matt said "screw you," he did not say "screw you."
Well, I appreciate you censoring yourself. Canadians, I don't know how many Canadians you know, but we swear far too much. So I have to constantly be biting my tongue when we stream. Just
I like your Mario sound effect.
Yeah, just in case, you know, gotta mess something up. I was just about to say. Anyway, all of this is so interesting and wonderful. And John, you're such a fascinating person to have on. And I love sort of seeing the inside of you know, again, a established, where are my palm leaves again? No, it's really great to have you on, and it's really fun to talk about this stuff. Are there any other questions from the community? Oh, actually, I did get a community question, Ellen. Are there any that you had first?
Let's see. I think we've kind of been circling around it, like talking about like the philosophy of putting games together, and and just how do you put together, especially a superhero story, and let it still feel fresh and stuff like that. So we were already talking about that with the, like, here are options, pick one, whatever one your players latch onto, that's the one you meant all along. So we've already, like, gone way more in depth than I think we were originally planning on with them.
We deep dived into it.
Yeah.
That's purely for John.
Me. That's what I do. It's my, you know.
No, that's awesome.
Why people, you know, value you, and why people are excited to check out some of your stuff. And the question is, from my friend Rob Diobald, when is Houses of the Blooded 2 coming?
I have talked to it. It's a tough question to answer. I have a version of Houses of the Blooded 2. I have 3 versions of Houses of the Blooded 2 that I'm equally unhappy with. And I want to come up with one that I'm happy with. The last one I was closest to being happy with, but still there's stuff that and largely because when I designed Houses, which is the Elric to Conan role-playing game. If D&D is Conan and House of the Blooded is Elric, in that Michael Moorcock created Elric as a character as kind of an answer to Conan. And it's not because he wasn't a fan of Robert E. Howard. He was a huge fan of Robert E. Howard. And Conan is a barbarian. Elric is a super civilized aristocrat. Conan becomes a king by his own hand. Elric is the emperor of Melniboné when the story starts. Conan hates sorcerers. Elric is a sorcerer. Conan is big and strong and self-reliant, and Elric needs drugs to live. Right? So it's kind of like he is the mirror opposite. He is the dark mirror of Conan. And House of the Blooded was in the same way, that kind of thing. In D&D, you start off as a wandering nomadic sellsword who murders people who don't look like you so you can go through their pockets for spare change. And in House of the Blooded, you're a noble. You have people for that. You send people out to do that for you. And because you have wealth and power and everything else, the only thing left to do is screw with your neighbor. And so it's a game about politics and romance. The shirt I'm wearing is the House of the Blooded shirt, which has the dagger and the rose, which is, oh, there it is, the dagger and the
There you
rose.
go.
Which is a glyph in Ven. It's a symbol in Ven culture, the people that you play for, because I'm a big fan of language, of learning. Like if I'm going to learn another culture, I learn the language and the history of the language and things, because I think that tells you a lot. And in Ven language, the word vrente, which is what this is a symbol for, is the same word they use for love and revenge. Because love is, like Joseph Campbell said, the sickness that can only be cured by the cause. So when you get love sick, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't do anything. And the only cure is the person who is causing it.
Interesting.
Right? Same way with revenge. Revenge, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't do anything, and the only cure is the cause. And that's the love and revenge, and that I think sums up like what the game is about, because that's.
Will you run it for us then?
I'd be happy to run it for you. Yeah.
Can I get my friend who said it was unplayable on, and then you can show him how?
Well, you said he didn't say it was unplayable. You said that he
said it's
doesn't know how to run it.
Yeah, well, that he didn't know how to play it. Like he
Yeah.
said, unplayable to him. So we'll bring him on and rub his face in it.
It was I before COVID and everything, I was running a House of the Blooded LARP.
Oh, cool.
And a friend of mine, Ken St. Andre, who designed possibly the second role-playing game, Tunnels and Trolls, who also lives out here in Phoenix, was there. And he saw the vast number of women who were playing in the game. And he was like, John, how do you get so many women to play your games? And I said, I design games that women want to play. That's,
Yep.
here's a game about love and revenge and romance and intrigue and politics and all this stuff. And lo and behold, it attracts a certain kind of player, and generally that kind of player is women, because it's about all of those things. So,
well, I'm excited to try it too. So, whatever that means. This was such a blast to have you on, John. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today and chatting. I think we're going to have you back in a few weeks, or just to chat again, because honestly, it's really fascinating to hear your insights. And I know you're going to be doing a lot more stuff with Sigil. Sigil, helped with 7th Sea. I know there's a lot of collaboration in the future, and as well as there's a number of your stories that a company that I work for, Soundbooth Theater, has been recording and sort of publishing as well too. So there's a lot of crossover between your work and what we do here and what we've been working on. So
That
we're very
network
excited to have you back.
effect.
What work?
That network effect.
That network respect. When you're all nerds and you all like, fun, crazy shit, it's weird how many things overlap. Who would have thought it?
Professional wrestling.
We're also going to need to play some crazy House of the Blooded RPG too, because I'm very fascinated as to what that looks like and how that plays. But for now, I think that is going to be it from us. So thank you so much, John, for hanging out with us today. Huge round of applause for you. And as always, Ellen and myself are so happy that you came and hung out with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another guest. I can't announce yet because they're still confirming. And I think that is it from us. Anything last minute, Ellen, that we need to?
I don't think so. I think that's it. What we've got this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. We'll see you Monday for S5E. Take care.